Good evening. Thank you ever so much for joining us, and thank you to everyone who's joining us online at the moment. We're online on Facebook and YouTube. We are the Wiltshire Music Centre. We are a concert hall and community centre based in Bradford-on-Avon, UK. Find out more about the work that we do at www.wiltshiremusic.org.uk. If you've happened to stumble across this online, if you click the link in the description of this video, you can tune in for this evening's live stream where you'll be able to watch Clare Hammond in concert, so you can find all the details there. A couple of parish notices, a few other concerts which we definitely want you to know about. Riot Ensemble are going to be joining us for their second performance in as many years on Friday, the 24th of February. They're a contemporary classical chamber ensemble, and they'll be performing all sorts of really, really interesting works, including a new work by Jasmine Morris, which should be really, really interesting, so please do come along and join us for that. And the next of our lunchtime series, Harriet Burns, soprano, will be joining us for a recital on Wednesday the 1st of March at 1 p.m. on this stage. Ballads, bards and minstrels, so lots of good stuff in there. But today we're looking forward to Clare Hammond's performance. Clare, thank you so much for joining us, really appreciate it.
Oh, it's a real pleasure, thank you.
I was going through this programme, as everyone else did, and the quality and the variety within the programme is just amazing. You cover so many different worlds, so many different periods. Can you talk a little bit about, as a performer, how you approach a program with such variety intrinsically in it? Are you changing your style each time? Are you coming into it and putting your own brand on it each time? How do you approach such a program?
I always try to make sure that there's variety in my programs. I think as a pianist, well, as pianists in general, we're very lucky that we have such a broad repertoire. And in fact, the repertoire is often much broader than you might think. There's a lot of composers that I've come across only in the past few years who I've started to incorporate into my programs regularly. And the repertoire is much more diverse than I thought 10 years ago or when I was growing up. In terms of how I approach a program like this in performance, I do change my style for each composer. And obviously, because of the breadth of repertoire that I'm doing, that can involve quite drastic changes. So between the Mangeru, for example, which is late 18th century, early 19th century music, and the works by Arlene Sierra, which are very, very modern, written 4 years ago. So there's a completely different way of approaching the keyboard and sonority between those pieces. But I love that breadth, not just of repertoire, but also of colour, of attack that you can get if you program repertoire in this way.
So how do you start when you put this program together? Do you have kind of one piece in mind and then it all kind of flows through? Do they naturally kind of, are there bedfellows within the program that kind of fit together as you go?
There tend to be core works that I include in most of my recital programs in a season. So, for example, the Beethoven Pathétique Sonata, the Mangeru I've been doing a lot of recently because I released a disc of her etudes in the autumn, so I've been doing those in virtually every program I've had. And then I build the rest of the repertoire around that, depending on the preferences of the promoters or if there's a specific local connection sometimes, but also to try and make sure that there's a narrative, that the program makes narrative sense. So, you know, you have something quite solid and substantial in the middle. The second half for me is often a little more sort of split up and more diverse in terms of the different styles that I approach. But I try to make sure there's a balance between familiar works that people will recognise and new discoveries.
Hélène de Mangeru is a name that certainly is less familiar to me, and maybe less familiar to most of our audience as well. Can you talk a little bit about her output and her stylistic importance as well in terms of how she fits between the 17th and the 18th century?
Well, Mangeru is a very exciting discovery, I suppose. I hadn't heard of her until 3 years ago when I was performing in France, and I was introduced to an academic called Jérôme Dorival, and he has dedicated his life to reviving her music, and has been doing that since the 90s, but it's only really recently that word has caught on and that more performers have started to play her music, and I believe that I'm the first performer in the UK who's been doing a lot of this work. She was writing, well, these etudes, for example, were written between 1788 and 1812, but she wrote in a style that was decades ahead of her time. You will hear later on this evening, it has a romantic sensibility. Although she was a contemporary of Mozart, it sounds much more like Mendelssohn and Schumann. And considering the time she was writing, that really is extraordinary. Her life story was just incredible. She was born into an aristocratic family, ended up having to escape the terror. Her husband was the Marquis of Montgeroux. They went to Italy to try and secure support from pro-monarchy aristocrats, I suppose, there, but were kidnapped en route. They were imprisoned. Her husband died. She found her way back to Paris, was imprisoned again during the Great Terror, and was put on trial, and apparently managed to negotiate her freedom by improvising a set of variations on the Marseillaise that moved the judges to tears. So it's quite a remarkable life story, but for me, I mean, the real wonder is how she was able to compose such music at that time. It's almost as if she had a crystal ball, and it's very frustrating we have very little historical information about the context in which she was working, and nobody took the trouble to save her correspondence. We have very few scores. So we don't know, for example, very much about whether other composers were directly influenced by her, but it seems impossible when you hear the music to imagine that they weren't. So I think she's a very significant figure.
So why is it that composers like Hélène de Montgeroux just kind of fall into the cracks in the kind of music history, and you get these kind of oeuvres? Well, obviously you've got the Beethoven coming along, and that being such a core part of the piano repertoire. And these composers of such importance and such stylistic interest just get lost in the shuffle a little bit.
I think all of us, whether we are listeners or if we're music professionals, I think we underestimate when we look back the extent to which having a career as a composer is dependent on the infrastructure as well. And obviously Hélène de Montgeroux was female, so she didn't have access to the same kinds of opportunities that Beethoven would have, for example. She didn't get the same kind of education because her parents were training her up for the marriage market. They weren't considering that she was going to be a professional in the way that Beethoven's father clearly was. She couldn't get publishers until much later. She wasn't able to access public performance opportunities, not only because she was female, but because she was an aristocrat. And in France at that time, aristocrats were restricted very much to their public role and were not expected to, publish music or have a public career of any kind. And then I mentioned that nobody took the trouble to save her correspondence. There was even that she had one son, and she ran a very successful musical salon. She was very well connected. All the great and the good performers used to come and perform there. But she wasn't perceived in the same way that she would have been if she was male. She was running the salon, and she was one of Europe's greatest pianists, one of Europe's greatest improvisers. Her compositions were much less valued at the time. So her career as a composer was so radically different from someone like Beethoven's. And of course that perpetuates, and in terms of compound interest, after they die, Beethoven's music was sustained, whereas Montgeroux's just completely fell into oblivion for 200 years. So, it's just, well, nearly 200 years. So it's just completely different context. And I think we look at the music and we think, well, this music is brilliant and it's worthwhile. But actually that music will not reach an audience unless the composer has access to the whole infrastructure that comes with it. And that's what we don't see.
Sure. I mean, in a way, it's fantastic, but it's also incredibly frustrating that it's notable that you have 3 female composers in your classical program, which is something which doesn't appear in anywhere near enough classical programs, and we tend to get the same names and the same male names. To what extent is it important to you as a performer to program female composers as a part of your work? Do you see that as a necessary part of your programming, or is it just, here are great pieces of music that should share a stage with all these other more well-known works?
I think there are 2 strands for me personally. I mean, first there's a question of I suppose social justice. I'm aware of how gender inequality has affected me in various instances throughout my life, and I'm a very privileged person. I've had access to an enormous number of wonderful opportunities that a lot of people don't. So if I'm affected significantly by these issues, then historically speaking, women living 200 years ago, people of colour, there's a whole raft of, again, sort of structural issues that we don't see that mean that this music has been stymied and that it hasn't been brought to the fore. So there is that issue, and I think for me personally that issue is particularly important when I look to the next generation. I've got 2 daughters who are 5 and 6 years old, and it is very important to me that they know it's possible to be a composer. When I was growing up, I knew about Clara Schumann and Fanny Mendelssohn, only because they were closely related to male composers. I assumed that women didn't really compose when I was, this is when I was very little. So I didn't really bother myself, and I don't think the world has lost a great composer because I didn't try it. I mean, I don't have a great deal of compositional talent, but there will be girls who perhaps didn't view it as an opportunity, and then we've lost out on that kind of, on their potential. But I think for me it's very important that the younger generations see that they have these opportunities. I said there was a second strand to programming music by people of colour or by women. I think I was talking about how much I enjoy the variety. And these composers, so in this programme tonight we have Hélène de Montgeroux, Arlene Sierra, there's Samuel Coleridge-Taylor, I think everyone else is...
Clara Schumann.
And Clara Schumann, sorry, yes. So we've got four people who I wouldn't have, whose music I didn't know when I was growing up. And you'll hear they have such distinctive voices, such unique writing, and this is just music that, regardless of any social issues, that it just deserves to be heard. So for me, that's why I programmed this repertoire.
Fantastic, and the music definitely deserves to be heard. There's so much to dig into. We'll do a bit of a whistle-stop tour on it. You talk about the voices, and you talk about the Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. This work, Deep River, comes from his set of Negro spirituals. To what extent, you talked about the way in which you change your style when you play different music. How do you approach a piece that would it have been originally composed for voices? Is it something that thinks about kind of a voice, a choral structure?
Yes, so Samuel Coleridge-Taylor's 24 Negro Melodies take African American spirituals, and there are some others that take music from directly from Africa itself, and also there's one from the Caribbean. And these are pieces or melodies, I suppose, that would have been sung initially. Deep River is a well-known African-American spiritual. And Samuel Coleridge-Taylor approached these very much as vocal works. They're almost like transcriptions at the piano. Like, he's taken the melody, and with each of them, he writes the melody at the top, so you can see the original melody. And then he essentially composes what is, I suppose, variations on the melody, but the vocal origin is always very clear. With these, and he wrote in the preface to the whole set that he sought to do for African American music what Brahms had done for the Hungarian, what Dvorak had done for the Bohemian, and not that he was trying to improve it. He was very keen to emphasize that. He said that he wasn't improving this music any more than Brahms was when he wrote the variations on the theme by Haydn. He was just presenting it in a different format. And as a pianist, it's quite tricky to play a piece that is primarily vocal, because you really have to work on sustaining a line. I can't recreate the sound of an African American spiritual at the piano, so it's more about evoking that atmosphere for me.
You've got the Beethoven Pathétique and the Mendelssohn Song Without Words in this program, two absolutely iconic pieces that have been recorded and performed so many times, and goodness knows when you first interacted with these pieces and for how long you've been playing it. How do you approach a piece of music that has been performed and recorded so many times? How do you, when you approach a piece, indeed, that you perform on multiple occasions, as it would be with the Montague and everyone else, how does that affect your interpretation of it in the moment?
Well, when I'm preparing music that is very well known, like the Pathétique Sonata, for example, I do try to make sure that I could never listen to all the recordings, but I do listen to a large number of recordings just to get a sense of what's possible. And then I do that fairly early on in the process, and then I put those to one side and I really double down on the text and look at the score in great detail and just try and work out exactly what he's getting at with the minutest of details. It's not possible to get everything from the score that you need. I would say that for me, the score only provides you with about 60% of the information that you need to make a complete performance. And I'm not saying that because I'm not conscientious about the score. It's sort of at the other end of the extreme. I try to be as conscientious as I can with the notation, but there's so many things to do with colour, to do with pedal, to do with the mood of what you play, that it's just not possible to notate. And these are things that I discuss with living composers when I'm working with them, when we're deciding how to notate something. And my work with living composers has really made me aware of the limitations of notation. But I do try and do as much as I can with works that are very well known, just to really make sure that I have the text at the forefront. But it is important to listen to other performers as well. It's about getting a balance between those.
Sure. What do we have to look forward to in the Arlene Sierra? It's a piece which I've never come across before personally.
There's 2 miniatures by Arlene Sierra which are called Painted Bunting and Black and White Warbler, and she takes the cries of these birds and uses them to create the musical motifs of the work. You'll hear they're quite high-pitched at times. There's quite a lot of repetitive motives. They're relatively new pieces to me. I've only performed them a few times, but each time the audience actually, I don't want to jinx it, you may not tonight, but at the end of each performance so far, the audience has burst out laughing because it's such imaginative, inventive music. And someone even asked me, is that notated in the same way as the other pieces that you're playing? And it is, but it sounds so unusual that it could almost be from another world, really.
You're finishing the program with Albéniz's Iberia. I mean, it's such a classic work. And can you talk a little bit? I mean, you've spoken so eloquently about your stylistic, the way in which you approach pieces stylistically. Technically, what does a piece like this have in store? What are the challenges that you come across as a solo performer performing works of this level of virtuosity?
There are 2 main issues that have been a challenge for me in the Albéniz. The first is mechanical, just getting around all the notes in a way that means you bring out the different lines, because they're very complex textures, and particularly in Triana, the third one, there are a lot of lines where you've got 3 or 4 different lines going on. There's a melody that needs to come out, and he splits that between 2 hands. So you've got like 1 note in the right, 3 in the left, 2 in the right, and you've got to make sure that you have a continuous melodic line weaving through this, which can be quite tricky. And the other difficulty is colour, because this music is so evocative and it's such an imaginative way of using the instrument. But to really capture the Spanish colour and the atmosphere, that took a lot of work, actually. And I don't know why it should be particularly so in the Albéniz, but it is, this music, more than most other pieces that I played, I think for me, really conjures up an atmosphere and a feeling of being somewhere. And that might be because as a teenager, one of the first trips I did abroad was to Seville, and it was just mind-blowing. So it may just be personal associations for me, but it's incredible music.
Can you put a finger on what makes it Spanish? I know that's a kind of a really throwaway thing because it's so visceral and it's so immediate, but is there any kind of distinct features that you can identify and go, oh, okay, that's something which I can hear as being distinctly of Spain, of that kind of civilian style?
Well, Albéniz was influenced heavily by folk music, and he did incorporate different songs and dances from different parts of Spain into his music. And there are certain modes that you can hear, certain scales that give it a particular colour. Some of the virtuosic writing you'll get. Is it okay if I demonstrate?
Go for it,
yeah.
Please. What a treat.
I won't demonstrate at great length, but there's a few figures like this. I mean, it took me 3 seconds to play that, and you already have been transported to Spain. It's just very, very clear, some of these figurations, where he's coming from.
It's so exciting to look forward to this program, and there's so much to dig into. And you're obviously a very versatile pianist. You've got upcoming, concerto performances coming up. You've got other projects as well. What does a solo recital bring to you as a performer? What challenges does it bring? What excitements does it bring? And yeah, indeed, what is there? I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase it. I think, what challenges does it bring to you as a performer? How is it different, and how do you react as a performer to the solo space, the piano, the audience, the everything?
Well, for me, there are 3 main strands to my work. There's the solo recitals, the chamber music that I do, and in that I include working with vocalists as well, and then concertos. And they all have their own challenges. The concertos are the scariest because there's so many people on stage, and if something goes wrong, you have to stay with the orchestra. They're not going to move to accommodate you. But having said that, the solo recitals are the most intense because I'm in charge of everything. So I create all of the kind of musical texture, and I can shape that, so that's very, very intense. One of the things I love about chamber music is that you can bounce off the energy of the other performers, and I can't do that as when I'm doing solo recitals, so these are the most exhausting, I think. And they are the most challenging from a technical point of view. There's more notes in tonight's recital than there will be if I was doing a concerto, for example, or a chamber concert. And it's just very intense. I have to get into an almost meditative state to kind of sink down and just be in the right zone to perform a recital like this. And it's very tiring. I think there are pros and cons, but I wouldn't want to do all solo recitals, but it's a very important strand of my work, and I find it immensely fulfilling.
Fantastic. Do we have any questions in the room at all? Is there anyone who wants to ask any questions? Yes, from the middle. Let me just repeat that for the people on the live stream. So what age did you start playing the piano? Are you ever too late to start playing the piano, and when would you recommend starting?
I was 6 when I started. I got piano lessons for my 6th birthday. From my experience teaching children, and I haven't taught a vast number of small children, I have enormous respect for people who do, because it really, from what I've tried, it's very challenging to keep things interesting for them. But I think it's probably a good idea to start around 6. I have taught some very bright children who were younger than that, and I remember one little boy who was 4, phenomenally intelligent boy. He picked everything up immediately, but he couldn't see the point of it. So once he'd done it once, he just wouldn't do it again, which was very difficult. So I think 6 is probably the best time to get started. If you want to be a professional, I suppose there probably is a cut-off point. I think, I may be wrong on this, but I heard that Paul Lewis started when he was 11 or 13, that kind of age. I haven't heard that directly from him, so don't quote me on that. But I think if you started much beyond that, you would have difficulty making it your career. But in terms of getting pleasure from music, I don't think it's ever too late. There are so many different ways of enjoying music and of playing it, even if you never play it publicly. Just knowing a little about how it's put together can immeasurably help your listening and sort of enrich that. It's a wonderful thing to do, regardless of what sort of venue you choose to do it in. Yeah.
Any other questions in the room? We probably have time for one more. Well, failing that, I might steal it then. And I tend to ask the same slightly grandiose question to all artists who I get to speak with on stage. And because the live concert experience is so special, what do you hope audiences take out from this performance or any live performance that they may come to where they see yourself play, or anyone else indeed from here? What do you hope they bring out of it?
That's a really difficult question to answer, because for me, when I've given recitals and they've really resonated with an audience, it's always been in an unpredictable way, and it's often been due to personal issues that are personal to individual people. So it might be because a particular piece reminds them of their father, playing the piano on a Sunday afternoon, or because they're going through something particularly challenging at the moment and something in the music just set them off. So for me, in general, I hope that for all of my performances, I hope that there's a quality of connection between the music, between what I'm doing and the audience, because you can only get that in live performance, and that's something that really came home very forcefully to me during the pandemic. It didn't matter how hard I tried. I could never simulate that feeling of having an audience, if I was live streaming a concert, even if it was in a massive concert hall with a beautiful piano and wonderful technicians for Radio 3. It doesn't feel the same, because you don't have that quality of connection with listeners in the same space. And there's an intensity to that you can't get any other way, I don't think. So I just hope that connection is strong, because then the music can be at its most powerful in different ways for each person.
Well, we're so excited to experience that, and thank you so much for talking today, and thank you everyone in the room for joining us, and thank you to everyone online as well. If you're watching online, go into the description. In there is a link to watch tonight's concert that shall be kicking off in just over half an hour or so. We are the Wiltshire Music Centre. We're a concert hall and community centre based in Bradford-on-Avon. Very much looking forward to tonight's concert. Thank you ever so much, Claire.
Thank you, and thank you everyone.